The room was a sanctuary of hushed sounds, the gentle beep of the heart monitor, the whisper of the oxygen machine, and the shallow, ragged rhythm of Emily's breathing. For 3 days, Thomas had not left her side. He sat in a worn, uncomfortable chair that had molded itself to the shape of his grief, his world shrinking to the small, pale hand he held in his own. At 68, he was a man weathered by a lifetime of hard work, but the exhaustion he felt now was of a different kind. It was the soul-deep weariness of a man watching his entire world fade. Emily had been the vibrant, beating heart of their 42 years together. Now, she was a fragile whisper of herself, her body finally succumbing to the illness that had waged a slow, merciless war against her. But her mind, even in these final hours, remained sharp, her gaze clear, and her thoughts were not on herself, but on their only child, Chloe. "You need to call her, Tom," Emily whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. It took a monumental effort for her to speak. I need to see my girl." Thomas's heart constricted. He had been putting off this call, dreading it with a certainty that felt like a betrayal in itself. "She's busy, Em. You know how her work is." A faint, sad smile touched Emily's lips. "She's always busy, but not for this, not for her mother. Please, Tom, call her." He squeezed her hand, his own throat tight with unshed tears. He pulled out his phone, his fingers feeling clumsy and thick as he scrolled to Chloe's name. He stepped out into the sterile, brightly lit hallway of the hospice, the cheerful quiet of the place a stark contrast to the storm in his chest. He pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, a third time. He was about to hang up when she finally answered, her voice sharp and breathless, backgrounded by the chaotic din of an airport terminal. "Dad? Is everything okay? I'm literally about to board." The casual irritation in her tone was like a physical blow. "Chloe," he began, his voice hoarse, "it's your mother, the doctor. He said it's time. Hours, maybe, not days." There was a pause on the other end of the line, filled with the tinny announcement of a boarding call for a flight to Denpasar. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice shifting into a tone of practiced theatrical sympathy. "Oh, that's just awful. I'm so sorry to hear that." "You need to come home, sweetheart," Thomas said, clinging to a desperate hope. "She's asking for you. She wants to see you." Another pause, longer this time. He could hear her sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated inconvenience. "Dad, I can't. I'm at the gate. Our flight to Bali is in 20 minutes. We've had this trip planned for 6 months. It's non-refundable. Everything is booked." The words didn't compute. Bali, non-refundable. He felt a dizzying sense of disbelief, as if they were speaking different languages. "Chloe, did you hear me?" he asked, his voice rising in pitch. "Your mother is dying." "I know, and it's terrible. It really is," she said, her voice quick and defensive. "But what do you want me to do? I can't just drop everything. The kids have been looking forward to this. It's our one big family vacation for the year. Mom would understand. She always said she wanted us to live our lives to the fullest." He was speechless. She was using her mother's own generous spirit as a weapon, twisting a lifetime of selfless love into an excuse for this final, profound act of selfishness. "I'll call as soon as we land and get to the hotel," Chloe continued, her voice regaining its usual confident clip. The crisis now managed, categorized, and deferred. "I'll check in every day. Send her all my love. Tell her I'm thinking of her." "She doesn't need your thoughts, Chloe," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She needs her daughter." "Well, I can't be there right now," she snapped, her patience gone. "It's just not possible. I have to go. They're calling our row. I'll call you from the resort." "Bye, Dad." The line went dead. Thomas stood in the hallway, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. He felt a coldness spread through him that had nothing to do with the hospice's air conditioning. It was the chilling recognition that the daughter he and Emily had raised, the center of their universe, had just chosen a 2-week vacation over her mother's final moments. He walked back into the room, his face a carefully constructed mask of calm. Emily's eyes fluttered open, searching his. Is she coming?" she whispered, her voice filled with a hope that shattered his heart. He looked at his dying wife, at the woman he had loved for more than 4 decades, and he did the only thing he could. He lied. "Yes, my love," he said, his voice thick as he took her hand. "She's on her way. She'll be here soon." A look of profound peace settled on Emily's face. She squeezed his hand, a faint, final pressure. "Good," she murmured, her eyes closing. "My good girl." She died 3 hours later, her breathing growing softer and softer until it simply stopped. She died peacefully, holding his hand, believing her daughter was rushing to her side. And Thomas was left alone in the deafening silence, the weight of his wife's death compounded by the unbearable weight of his daughter's betrayal. The empty space in the room where Chloe should have been felt vast and cold, a wound that he knew would never, ever heal. The days that followed Emily's death were a blur of hollow-eyed logistics. Thomas moved through a fog of grief, performing the necessary tasks of death with the numb precision of a robot. He chose a casket, simple, elegant, made of cherry wood, just as she would have wanted. He selected the flowers, white lilies and pale pink roses, the same flowers he had brought her on their first date. He sat with the funeral director, a man with a kind, practiced sadness in his eyes, and answered questions about her life for the obituary. Emily Rose Thompson, beloved wife, devoted mother, cherished friend. The word mother felt like a lie, a cruel irony that stuck in his throat. He did it all alone. The house, once filled with the warmth of Emily's presence, was now a vast, silent mausoleum of memories. Every object was a fresh wound. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her half-finished knitting in a basket by the armchair, her favorite mug in the kitchen cabinet. He would find himself standing in the middle of a room, unsure of why he had entered, the purpose of his movement erased by a sudden, overwhelming wave of her absence. He sent a text to Chloe, a simple, factual message. "Mom passed away peacefully last night. The funeral is on Friday at 11 a.m. He didn't ask if she was coming home. He didn't have the strength to face another rejection." The reply came hours later, a string of emojis, a crying face, a broken heart, a praying hands, followed by a single, sterile sentence. "So devastated. Wish I could be there. Will be thinking of you all." She was thinking of them from a beach in Bali. The thought was so grotesque, so profoundly selfish, that Thomas felt a cold, hard anger begin to form in the pit of his stomach, a small, solid stone in the vast, churning sea of his grief. It was on the second day, as he sat at the dining room table, staring blankly at a stack of sympathy cards, that the doorbell rang. He almost didn't answer. He didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to receive another casserole or another set of sad, pitying eyes. But the bell rang again, a gentle, persistent chime. He opened the door to find Sarah standing on his porch. Sarah, Chloe's best friend since kindergarten. She was holding a large, steaming pot of what smelled like Emily's chicken soup. Her eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a genuine, unvarnished sorrow that mirrored his own. "Oh, Thomas," she said, her voice thick with tears. She didn't offer platitudes or empty condolences. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a hug that was so warm, so full of shared grief, that the dam inside him finally broke. He stood there in the arms of his daughter's best friend and wept. Sarah didn't say much. She didn't need to. She came inside, put the soup on the stove, and made a pot of tea. She sat with him at the kitchen table in the silence, and her presence was a quiet comfort and anchor in his storm of grief. She had been like a second daughter to Emily, spending countless hours in this very kitchen, learning to bake at Emily's side, confiding in her when she and Chloe were teenagers. "I can't believe she did this," Sarah said softly after a long while, shaking her head. "I can't believe Chloe didn't come home." "She's on vacation," Thomas said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "There are no vacations for this," Sarah replied, her voice fierce with a loyalty that his own daughter lacked. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. Emily deserved better." In the days leading up to the funeral, Sarah was a constant, quiet presence. She helped him sort through photographs for the memorial display. She answered the phone when he couldn't bear to speak to another well-meaning relative. She made sure he ate, that he drank water, that he didn't simply disappear into the fog. The day of the funeral was gray and overcast. The sky a perfect reflection of his mood. The chapel was filled with a small gathering of old friends and distant family. Thomas sat in the front row, a solitary figure at the end of the pew. The empty space beside him, the space reserved for Chloe, was a gaping wound. It screamed her absence louder than any eulogy. He stood at the podium, his hands trembling as he unfolded the speech he had written. He spoke of his life with Emily, of their first meeting, of her infectious laugh, of her quiet strength. He spoke of her love for her garden, her passion for books, her unwavering belief in the goodness of people. He did not mention Chloe. To mention her would be to acknowledge the betrayal, and he could not bring himself to tarnish Emily's memory with that final, ugly truth. After the service, back at the house, Sarah stayed. While the other guests made their awkward exits, she quietly cleared away the untouched plates of food and made a fresh pot of coffee. Later, they sat together in the living room, a box of old photo albums between them. They looked through the pictures, a silent communion of shared memory. There was Emily as a young woman, her smile radiant. There was Thomas, young and awkward in his army uniform. And there was Chloe, a bright, beautiful little girl, laughing on her father's shoulders, holding her mother's hand. "She used to be so different," Sarah murmured, tracing a finger over a photo of her and Chloe at their high school graduation. "She used to be so full of light." "What happened?" Thomas asked, the question a genuine, painful plea. Sarah sighed, her gaze distant. "I don't know. College, maybe. Her job." She started to believe that success was the only thing that mattered, that feelings were a weakness. She started to see people, even the people who loved her most, as resources. or obstacles. Her words were a painful confirmation of what Thomas had long suspected, but had never wanted to admit. He had lost his daughter long before her mother had died. Sarah's presence was the only thing that made that terrible week bearable. Her grief was real, her comfort was genuine, and her loyalty to Emily's memory was absolute. As he watched her carefully pack away the photo albums, her movements gentle and respectful, a strange and unsettling thought occurred to Thomas. In the greatest crisis of his life, the person who had acted like a true daughter was not his own. It was the quiet, kind-hearted woman who now sat with him in the wreckage of his world, sharing his silence and his sorrow. The first few months after the funeral were a landscape of gray. Thomas existed in a state of suspended animation, the world outside his windows muted and distant. The house was no longer a home. It was an archive of absence. He would catch himself listening for the sound of Emily's footsteps on the stairs, or turning to share a thought with her before the crushing reality of the empty room settled back in. Chloe's promised daily calls from Bali never materialized. Instead, he received a sporadic series of texts, each one a small, perfectly formed crystal of self-absorption. "Thinking of you, Dad. The sunsets here are unreal," followed by a photo of her holding a brightly colored cocktail against a backdrop of turquoise water. "Hope everything went okay with the service. So emotionally drained from all this." Sent from a hammock strung between two palm trees. He tried to call her once, needing to hear a familiar voice, but it went straight to voicemail. Her message was breezy and professional. "You've reached Chloe. I'm out of the country living my best life. Leave a message." He hung up without speaking. After 2 weeks, he stopped checking his phone for her messages. He unfollowed her on social media, unable to bear the relentless stream of smiling, sun-drenched photos that felt like a personal affront to his grief. The silence from his daughter became a solid, tangible thing, a wall he no longer had the energy to try and climb. His only connection to the outside world was Sarah. True to her word, she became a quiet fixture in his life. Every Tuesday, she would appear at his door with groceries and a home-cooked meal. She never stayed long at first, respecting his need for solitude, but her presence was a lifeline. She didn't try to cheer him up or tell him to move on. She simply sat with him, sharing a cup of tea, her quiet companionship a balm on his raw, wounded heart. As spring turned to summer, her visits grew more frequent. She started helping him in the garden, a space that had been Emily's pride and joy. Together, they weeded the flower beds and pruned the roses Emily had so lovingly tended. Sarah knew the names of all the plants, remembering conversations she'd had with Emily years ago about which ones preferred sun and which preferred shade. Working with his hands in the soil, feeling the sun on his back, Thomas began to feel the first stirrings of something other than grief. They fell into a comfortable routine. On Saturdays, they would tackle a project in the house, organizing the library, cleaning out the attic. In the evenings, they would sometimes watch one of the old black-and-white films Emily had loved. They rarely spoke of Chloe. Her name was a ghost that haunted the edges of their conversations, an unspoken sadness that they both acknowledged, but neither had the heart to address directly. Through his quiet friendship with Sarah and the long, solitary hours of reflection, Thomas began to see his daughter with a painful, unflinching clarity. He sifted through his memories, re-examining them without the soft filter of parental love. He remembered Chloe as a teenager, her casual cruelty to a less popular classmate, an act he and Emily had dismissed as just a phase. He remembered her in college, her frantic calls home, always about money, never about how they were. He remembered the way she had treated her first serious boyfriend, discarding him with a cold efficiency once he no longer served her ambitions. He and Emily had always made excuses for her. "She's just driven," Emily would say. "She's ambitious," Thomas would agree. They had mistaken her selfishness for strength, her ruthlessness for focus. They had watered a weed, believing it was a rose, and had been surprised when it grew thorns. The betrayal at Emily's deathbed was not an aberration. It was the culmination of a lifetime of choices. It was the truest expression of the person she had become. As the first anniversary of Emily's death approached, a quiet resolve settled in Thomas's heart. One evening, after Sarah had left, he went to the old wooden desk in his study. From the bottom drawer, he retrieved a thick manila envelope containing their joint will. He spread the document out on the desk. It was simple and straightforward. Upon the death of the second party, their entire estate, the house, the savings, the investments, was to pass to their only child, Chloe. He stared at the legal jargon, at his and Emily's signatures at the bottom of the page. He thought of his wife's final wish, to see her daughter. He thought of Chloe's response, a non-refundable ticket to paradise. He thought of Sarah, quietly tending Emily's garden, her hands gentle among the roses, her heart full of a love and respect his own daughter could not comprehend. He looked at the framed photograph of Emily on his desk, her smile as warm and loving as ever. He knew, with a certainty that felt absolute, what she would want. She would want her legacy, the life they had built together, to be a blessing, not a reward for cruelty. She would want it to go to someone who understood that family is not about what you can get, but about what you're willing to give. Leaving everything to Chloe would not be an act of love. It would be a final, posthumous betrayal of the values Emily had lived by. It would be an endorsement of the very selfishness that had broken her heart in her final hours. Thomas picked up the phone and called his family lawyer, the same man who had drafted the will years ago. "David," he said, his voice clear and steady. "It's Thomas. I need to make some changes to my will. Significant changes." He was no longer just grieving his wife. He was now the sole guardian of her memory, and he would not allow it to be dishonored. David Chen, the family lawyer, was a man who had seen the full spectrum of human grief and greed. He had known Thomas and Emily for 30 years, had drafted their first wills when Chloe was just a little girl. When Thomas walked into his quiet, book-lined office, David's professional demeanor softened with genuine sympathy. "Thomas, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances," he said, gesturing to a comfortable leather chair. "Thank you, David," Thomas replied, sitting down. He didn't waste time with small talk. He placed the old will on the polished surface of the desk between them. "I want to change this. I want to write a new one." David looked at the document, then back at Thomas, his expression carefully neutral. "Of course. It's your right to do so. Are we talking about minor adjustments or a complete overhaul?" "A complete overhaul," Thomas said, his voice steady. He explained the situation with Chloe, the call from the airport, the vacation, the year of profound silence. He spoke without anger, his tone factual and resigned. He was not a man seeking revenge. He was a man seeking to restore a moral balance. David listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. He had seen Chloe grow up, had noted her increasingly sharp edges and self-centered worldview over the years. He was not surprised, but he was saddened. "I understand your feelings, Thomas," he said when Thomas had finished. "And legally, you're well within your rights. The estate is yours to dispose of as you see fit. But as your friend, as well as your lawyer, I have to advise you to think this through very carefully. Disinheriting a child is a significant step. It's final." "I know what it is," Thomas said, "and I have thought about it for a year." "Have you considered a trust?" David suggested gently. "You could place the assets in a trust for Chloe, with stipulations. Perhaps she could only access it under certain conditions, or have a trustee manage it for her." Thomas shook his head. "No, that's not what this is about. This isn't about punishing her or trying to control her from beyond the grave. It's about honoring Emily. It's about ensuring that the life we built together goes to someone who embodies the values we held dear. Love, loyalty, kindness. Chloe has made it very clear that those things mean nothing to her." The conviction in his voice was absolute. David nodded slowly, recognizing that Thomas's mind was made up. "All right, Thomas. Who, then, do you wish to name as your beneficiary?" "Sarah Jenkins," Thomas said without hesitation. David raised an eyebrow. "Chloe's friend?" "She has been more of a daughter to me this past year than my own," Thomas explained. "More importantly, she was a daughter to Emily when it mattered most. She loved her. She grieved for her. She remembers her." Even as he said the words, a small seed of doubt remained. Was this the right thing to do? Was he acting out of grief and anger? He decided he needed one more conversation before making it final. He told David he would return in a few days to sign the papers. That evening, he invited Sarah over for dinner. He made Emily's favorite pasta dish, and they ate in the quiet comfort that had become their routine. He didn't mention the will. Instead, he asked her about her life, her dreams, a topic they had rarely broached. "A dream?" Sarah laughed, a soft, self-deprecating sound. "Oh, I don't know, Thomas. I'm a dental hygienist. My days are pretty planned out." "Everyone has a dream," he insisted gently, "even if it's a quiet one." She hesitated, then her expression softened. "Well," she said, a shy smile playing on her lips, "there is one thing. It's silly, really." "Tell me." "My grandmother," she began, her voice growing warmer as she spoke. "She was the most amazing baker. Our house always smelled of cinnamon and yeast. She taught me everything. We always talked about opening a little bakery together, a cozy place where people could come for coffee and a perfect croissant. We were going to call it the Rolling Pin." Her smile faded slightly. "But she passed away before we ever could. And with student loans and rent, well, it's just one of those things you put on a shelf, you know?" She spoke of it without a trace of self-pity, simply stating it as a fact of life, a beautiful, unattainable dream. In that moment, Thomas's last shred of doubt vanished. He saw it all with perfect clarity. A bakery, a place of warmth, of comfort, of community, a place that would bring joy to others. It was the most fitting tribute to Emily he could possibly imagine. The next day, he returned to David Chen's office. "I've made my decision," he said. "The entire estate goes to Sarah Jenkins." He then added the final, crucial detail. "But there is one condition. A portion of the funds must be used to establish a small business, a bakery, and it is to be named Emily's Table. David wrote down the instructions, a small, respectful smile on his face. He understood now. This wasn't an act of vengeance. It was an act of love, a way of ensuring that Emily's nurturing spirit would continue to feed the world long after she was gone. Thomas picked up the pen. The new will was a simple document, but every word felt heavy with meaning. He left Chloe a token amount, $1,000, enough to prevent any legal challenge on the grounds that she had been accidentally omitted. He also stipulated that with the money, she was to receive a sealed letter. He signed his name at the bottom of the page. The signature was firm and clear. As he lifted the pen, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had not disinherited his daughter. He had simply chosen a different heir for his and Emily's legacy of love. He had chosen the person who understood its true value. Another year spun by, measured not in months, but in the slow, quiet rhythm of healing. The sharp, jagged edges of Thomas's grief began to soften, worn smooth by the gentle tide of his new routine. His life, once a vast, empty house, had found a new kind of order. He and Sarah had become a small, unlikely family of two, their bond forged in shared loss and cemented by quiet companionship. He spent his mornings in Emily's garden, which had never looked more beautiful. Under Sarah's and his care, the roses bloomed with a fierce, vibrant life, their fragrance a constant, sweet reminder of the love that had planted them. His afternoons were often spent at the local library, rediscovering the joy of reading that he and Emily had shared. He was not lonely. He was solitary, and he'd come to appreciate the difference. The silence of his home was no longer an oppressive weight. It was a peaceful space for reflection. He rarely thought of Chloe. The wall of her silence had been so absolute that she had started to feel less like a person and more like a character from a book he had read long ago. He had accepted her absence as a permanent condition, a closed chapter. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late October, the phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize with a different area code. He almost let it go to voicemail, but some lingering paternal instinct made him answer. "Hello? Dad?" The voice was thin, reedy, and laced with a frantic energy he had never heard before. It took him a moment to place it. It was Chloe, but stripped of her usual armor of confidence and condescension. This was the voice of a cornered animal. "Chloe," he said, his own voice carefully neutral. He sat down in the armchair by the window, a sense of weary inevitability settling over him. He had known this call would come one day. "Dad, oh my God, I'm so glad I reached you," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm back. I've been back for a few months. I didn't want to bother you." A lie, he thought calmly. You didn't call because you didn't need anything. "How are you, Chloe?" he asked, the question a polite formality. "Not good, Dad. Not good at all," she said, her voice cracking with a self-pity that was all too familiar. "Everything's a mess, a complete disaster." He waited, saying nothing, letting her fill the silence. "The business venture I was working on in Bali, it fell through," she explained, her voice a litany of excuses and blame. "My partner was a crook. He took all the investment money and disappeared. I was left with all the debt. I had to sell my condo to pay off some of it, but it wasn't enough. I'm staying on a friend's couch. They're threatening to sue me, Dad. The creditors are calling me day and night." She paused, waiting for a sympathetic response. Thomas offered none. He simply listened, a quiet, impartial observer to the collapse of the world his daughter had built on a foundation of selfish choices. "I didn't know who else to turn to," she continued, her voice now shifting into a softer, more manipulative key. "You're my dad. You're the only family I have left. I know we've had our distance, but family is supposed to help each other in a crisis, right? That's what you and Mom always taught me." The hypocrisy of her words was breathtaking. She was invoking the very concept of family she had so casually discarded on her mother's deathbed. "What do you want, Chloe?" he asked, his voice flat. "I need your help," she said, finally getting to the point. "I need money, a lot of it. Just a loan, of course, to get me back on my feet, to pay off these debts so I can start over. I calculated it. I need about $80,000. $80,000. She said it as if she were asking for bus fare. She had no concept of the value of money, of the decades of hard work and careful saving that had gone into building the nest egg she now saw as her personal emergency fund. "I'm so sorry to ask," she added, her voice dripping with false humility. "I know it's a lot, but I'm desperate, and I know you and Mom always had your savings. The house alone must be worth a fortune now. It would be just a small fraction of that, really, to help your only daughter." He listened to her carefully crafted speech, a mixture of panic, entitlement, and emotional blackmail. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a scene from a poorly written play. The anger he had once felt was gone, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. He was not looking at his daughter. He was looking at a stranger, a woman whose moral compass was so broken she couldn't even see how lost she was. She finished her plea, and the line went quiet, pregnant with her desperate expectation. She was waiting for him to play his part, to be the reliable, ever-given father he had always been. She was waiting for him to say, "Of course, sweetheart, anything for you." Thomas looked out the window at Emily's garden, at the last of the autumn roses blooming defiantly against the coming cold. He thought of his wife's final, peaceful breath, a peace he had bought for her with a lie. He thought of Sarah, her quiet loyalty, her genuine love. He thought of the new will, locked safely in his lawyer's office. "Chloe," he said, his voice quiet, but as solid and unyielding as stone. "I'm sorry to hear about your troubles, but I can't help you." A stunned silence crackled across the phone line. Chloe was so certain of his compliance, so accustomed to his role as the ever-reliable safety net, that his refusal simply did not register. "What?" she finally stammered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "What do you mean? You can't help? Is it not enough? Do you not have it?" "That's not the issue, Chloe," Thomas said, his voice remaining unnervingly calm. The initial shock quickly curdled into anger. The pleading, desperate daughter vanished, replaced by the demanding, entitled woman he knew all too well. "Then what is the issue, Dad?" she snapped. "I'm your daughter. I'm in trouble, and you're telling me you won't help? After everything? What about all that talk of family?" "You are the one who taught me the true meaning of that word, Chloe," he replied, the quiet power in his voice making her pause. "You taught me that family is a choice you make in the moments that matter, and you made your choice, at an airport gate, on your way to Bali." He could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Oh, So that's what this is about, she scoffed, her voice dripping with scorn. You're still holding a grudge about that? It was 2 years ago. I told you, Mom would have understood. You're being vindictive. No, Thomas said. I'm being consistent. You chose your vacation over your mother's final hours. You cannot now claim the benefits of a family you so thoroughly abandoned. Benefits? She shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. It's not a benefit, it's my right. It's my inheritance. The house, the savings, that's my money. The word hung in the air between them. My, not ours, not the family's, my. The depth of her entitlement was bottomless. Actually, Chloe, Thomas said, and for the first time he allowed a hint of cold, hard satisfaction to enter his voice. It's not. What are you talking about? Of course it is. I'm your only child. The law says... The law, Thomas interrupted, says that a person has the right to dispose of their assets as they see fit in a legally executed last will and testament. Your mother and I had a will, yes, but after she passed, I made some changes. He let the silence stretch, picturing her on the other end of the line, her mind racing, trying to process this new, unwelcome information. What changes? She asked, her voice now a low, dangerous hiss. I wrote a new will, he said simply. Your inheritance, Chloe, as stipulated in that document, amounts to exactly $1,000. And a letter. The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of a world collapsing. $1,000? She whispered, the words barely audible. You're joking. This is some kind of sick joke. A lesson. The lesson, Thomas said, was one you taught me. The will is very real. You can't do that, she sputtered, her voice trembling with a rage that was quickly eclipsing her shock. Who did you leave it to? There's no one else. Oh, but there is, he said. I left the entirety of the estate, the house, the savings, the investments, everything, to a person who demonstrated the love, loyalty, and respect that you could not. I left it to someone who was a daughter to your mother in her final days, when her own child was on a beach halfway around the world. Sarah? The name was a strangled cry of disbelief and fury. You left everything to Sarah, my best friend? You gave my inheritance to my friend? She is no longer your friend, Chloe. Thomas corrected her gently. Friends do not abandon each other in their darkest hours, and it was never your inheritance. It was a gift you failed to earn. She manipulated you, Chloe screamed, her voice raw. She saw a lonely old man and she swooped in. You've gone senile, crazy with grief. I'll fight this. I'll take you to court. I'll prove you were incompetent, that she exerted undue influence. You are welcome to try, Thomas said, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. But my lawyer, Mr. Chen, has a file. It contains a full psychiatric evaluation confirming my competence. It contains sworn affidavits from friends and neighbors. It contains screenshots of your social media posts from Bali, time-stamped to the day of your mother's funeral. It contains a record of every unanswered phone call and every callous text message. It is a very thorough file. He could hear her ragged, desperate breathing. She was trapped, and she knew it. The web was of her own making. You betrayed me, she finally whispered, the accusation thin and pathetic. Thomas felt a final, profound wave of sadness wash over him. She still didn't understand. She never would. No, Chloe, he said, his voice soft but final. You betrayed your mother. You traded her last breath for a cocktail and a sunset. Everything that has happened since is not my revenge. It is simply the consequence. The will stands. He did not wait for her reply. He did not need to hear any more accusations or threats. He gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting the connection. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. The last of the roses were gone, but the sturdy green leaves promised a new bloomin' in the spring. The house was quiet. For the first time in 2 years, the ghost of his daughter's betrayal had been faced, addressed, and finally laid to rest. Chloe, true to her nature, did not go quietly. The day after their phone call, the first letter from her newly hired lawyer arrived. It was a blustering, aggressive document, full of legal jargon and veiled threats. It accused Thomas of being emotionally compromised and susceptible to manipulation. It demanded a full accounting of Emily's estate and declared their intention to formally contest the new will on the grounds of diminished capacity and undue influence. Thomas simply forwarded the letter to David Chen. A week later, Chloe's lawyer received a calm, meticulously documented response. It included a summary of the psychiatric evaluation, copies of the affidavits from neighbors who had witnessed Sarah's consistent care and Chloe's prolonged absence, and a polite but firm refusal to entertain any settlement. The letter concluded by gently reminding Chloe's counsel of the potential legal and financial repercussions of filing a frivolous lawsuit. Chloe's legal threats evaporated. Faced with the high cost of a protracted court battle she was certain to lose, and with no funds to pay her lawyer, she was forced to retreat. Her rage, however, found other outlets. She launched a campaign of emotional warfare, leaving a series of increasingly desperate and vitriolic voicemails on Thomas's phone. "You're a cruel old man. You're trying to destroy my life," one message shrieked. "Sarah is a snake, a parasite. I hope you're both happy while I'm homeless." Another one sobbed. Thomas listened to the first two, then simply started deleting them without listening. They were the tantrums of a spoiled child who had been denied her favorite toy. They held no power over him anymore. The most difficult part of the aftermath was telling Sarah. He had put it off, knowing how she would react. He finally invited her for dinner one evening, and after they had finished eating, he laid the new will on the kitchen table. "I need you to see this, Sarah," he said quietly. She read the document, her eyes growing wider with each paragraph. When she finished, she looked up at him, her face pale with shock. "Thomas, no," she whispered, pushing the paper back towards him. "I can't accept this. It's not right. This is Chloe's. It's her family's." "You are my family, Sarah," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You and Emily. You were the one who held this family together when it mattered most. But a house, all of it, it's too much. It feels wrong." Her integrity, the very quality that made her so deserving, made it impossible for her to accept. "It's not a gift, Sarah," he explained, leaning forward. "It's a mission. It's a legacy. Do you remember telling me about your grandmother's bakery?" Her eyes filled with tears as she understood. "Emily's table," she read from the will, her voice cracking. "Emily spent her life nurturing people," Thomas said. "She fed their bodies and their souls. This is a way for that spirit to continue. It's not about the money. It's about creating a place of warmth and community in her name. It's what she would have wanted. She would have wanted her life's work to create more love in the world, not to reward selfishness. Please, Sarah, don't do it for me. Do it for her." She looked at the will, then at the photograph of Emily on the mantelpiece. She finally gave a slow, tearful nod. For Emily, she agreed, her voice barely a whisper. The news, when it inevitably spread through their small circle of mutual acquaintances, isolated Chloe completely. Friends who had initially offered her sympathy now saw the full, ugly picture. Her attempts to paint herself as the victim of a senile, grieving father fell flat when confronted with the simple, undeniable truth. She had chosen a vacation over her dying mother. Sarah, despite being the beneficiary, found herself in a difficult position. She tried to reach out to Chloe to explain, but her calls went unanswered. Chloe had cut her off completely, unable to face the woman who had become a living embodiment of her own failure as a daughter and a friend. Chloe's financial situation, as she had predicted, became dire. Without the safety net she had always taken for granted, her life of casual extravagance came to a crashing halt. She lost her apartment, her car, and the fair-weather friends who had been drawn to her success. She was left with nothing but her pride and the mountain of debt she had created, a solitary figure in a world of her own making. She had traded her family for a fantasy, and now, with the fantasy shattered, she found herself utterly and completely alone. The following spring, as the first crocuses pushed their way through the damp earth in Emily's garden, a different kind of new beginning was taking shape downtown. After months of careful planning, late nights spent poring over business plans, and a quiet, determined effort, Sarah found the perfect location for the bakery. It was a small, sun-drenched corner shop on a quiet street, with large windows and an old, slightly crooked door that chimed when you opened it. With Thomas's steady guidance and the resources from the estate, she transformed the space. It was a labor of love. Thomas, rediscovering a long-dormant skill for carpentry, helped her build the bookshelves and the main counter. Sarah spent weeks perfecting her grandmother's recipes, tweaking them until they were just right. The air in the small shop soon filled with the warm, life-affirming scents of cinnamon, yeast, and melting chocolate. They named it, as the will had stipulated, Emily's Table. The bakery opened on a bright Saturday in May, on what would have been Emily's 69th birthday. It was an instant success. It wasn't just the quality of the pastries or the richness of the coffee, it was the atmosphere. The place radiated a genuine warmth that was a direct reflection of the two people who had created it. It became a neighborhood hub, a place where people gathered not just to eat, but to connect. On the main wall, above a small, cozy fireplace, hung a large, beautifully framed photograph of Emily. It was a picture Thomas had taken of her in their garden years ago. She was laughing, her head tilted back, the sun catching in her hair. She looked vibrant, joyful, and full of life. It was not a memorial to a woman who was gone. It was a celebration of a spirit that was still very much present. Thomas found a new purpose in his life. He was at the bakery almost every day. He wasn't an owner or a manager. He was simply Tom, the quiet, kind-faced man who would sweep the floors, chat with the regulars, and tell stories about the woman whose portrait graced the wall. He would talk about her love for gardening, her terrible singing voice, her unwavering kindness. He was keeping her memory alive not through grief, but through joy. His life settled into a peaceful, meaningful rhythm. He had his mornings in the garden, his afternoons at the bakery, and his evenings in the quiet comfort of his home. He was no longer lonely. He'd found a new family in Sarah and in the community that had blossomed around Emily's table. He had found peace. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the bakery opened, Thomas was sitting at his usual table by the window, sipping a cup of tea and watching the leaves fall outside. The bell on the door chimed, and he looked up. Standing in the doorway was Chloe. She looked diminished, thinner, her expensive clothes replaced by simple, worn jeans and a plain sweater. The hard, defiant anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out weariness. She stood there for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the portrait of her mother on the wall. Sarah, who was behind the counter, froze. Thomas simply watched, his heart quiet. Slowly, Chloe walked to the counter. She didn't look at Sarah. She looked at the pastries under the glass. I'll have a croissant, please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah, after a moment's hesitation, served her. Chloe paid with a crumpled $5 bill, her hands trembling slightly. She took the pastry and turned, her eyes finally meeting Thomas's. He didn't see hatred in her gaze. He didn't see anger. He saw a vast, empty landscape of regret. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that was years too late, and then she walked out, the bell on the door chiming softly behind her. Thomas didn't know if he would ever see her again. He didn't know if she would ever find her way back from the wilderness of her own making. But as he watched her disappear down the street, he felt not anger, not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of closure. He turned his gaze back to the portrait of Emily. Her smile seemed to fill the room. He had honored her. He had protected her legacy. He had ensured that the love she had poured into the world would continue to grow, to bloom, to feed others. He took a sip of his tea. The bakery was warm, filled with the murmur of happy conversations and the scent of fresh bread. He was surrounded by a family born not of blood, but of loyalty, of kindness, of shared love for the woman who had brought them all together. He was at peace. He was home.